So welcome back, folks. We are joined by Alan Edwards, PR guru and author of new book coming out on June the 6th.
I was there.
And what's the subtitle?
Dispatches from a Life in Rock and Roll, out on June the 6th, published by Simon & Schuster, and you should buy it.
You have had an extraordinary life in rock and roll. And the thing I always think about when I meet you is just how unassuming and quiet and calm you are. But you've had a lifetime surrounded by some of the most insanely creative cultural people.
Mention some of the...
Just reel off some of the names.
Here, just to interject.
Go on.
The reason is it doesn't seem amazing when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah,
it's like a nightmare job. Are you going to get fired? Can you pay your mortgage? Is this rock star going to give you a bollocking? You know, and and what time can I get to the Arsenal at the weekend for the match? It's only when I now look back on it with this book and everything, I think it's like watching a film going by in a fast loop. I'm thinking, how did all that happen so fast?
Amazing.
And that movie included David Bowie, the Rolling Stones, Prince, the Spice Girls, Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson, and the, in my view, criminally underrated Gay Bikers on Acid.
Oh my God! Someone actually knows them.
I gave the Spice Girls.
I did mention
the
Spice Girls.
Yeah.
The list goes on. I mean, I could go on for it.
And Motorhead.
And of course, oh God,
please,
Motorhead. Remember me now, Motorhead. All right.
How did Status Quo slip through your fingers?
No, I did quote.
Oh, you did quote.
I was actually talking to him.
Alan Edwards Bingo is a dangerous game to play. Believe me.
Catch me out. I took a load of journalists up to see them at Glasgow Apollo, which you will know well.
Yeah.
It was incredible. It was the best gig in Europe at the time.
Amazing,
and the first floor used to bounce up and down.
Amazing.
And Quo doing down, down and down with 3,000 Glaswegians off their head on a Saturday night.
Brilliant.
I mean, that was rocking.
That's great.
So, anyone who knows about music and pop and a number of other things that you are involved in London and elsewhere around the world knows you, Alan, but also knows that you prefer to sort of stay out of the limelight because that's part
how I
of
was trained.
The job.
Yeah.
So what made you think, right, now I'm going to write a book?
It's been coming. I think it is an awful lot of my time hanging around with people like you and in hotel rooms and on planes, and tour buses. There's an awful lot of dead time when you go on tour with bands. And often I would tell stories to pass the time. I remember, I'll give you an example of how it worked. David Beckham, who was incredibly shy, I'd started working with him. There was a guy called Ian Penman from Esquire magazine was doing an interview with him. And I think it was the first major interview David had done. We went up the train and Ian was the guy who didn't speak much. He expressed himself in the writing. David at that point was so shy, he'd be looking at his feet when he was talking to you. So we meet at the hotel, Mick Hucknall's hotel just by the station in Manchester. I put them in a room and it's like silence, nothing's happening. So I came out with the stories. Oh, have you ever heard this one about the Rolling Stones? Did you ever know I played football with Bob Marley? And I got it going. After about 20 minutes, everyone's like enjoying the stories. Yeah. I said, I've just got to go make a call. Went out.
Right.
Walked around the town, came back an hour later, and it was all going great.
Brilliant.
So these stories have been sort of chiselled and polished in all kinds of bars and places over the world.
Did you ever keep a diary or anything? Or?
I did and I didn't. What I did do, unusually, I worked off a desk diary every day, so I've got 50 years worth of it.
And so you know where you were and who you were with.
Every single day. And I haven't looked back on every page. Sometimes it can be almost quite upsetting because you think, that happened and this person's not here. But some days, some moments you look back and it's quite surreal, and it'll be like 12 o'clock Motorhead or Hawkwind come in the office, and then it'll be 3 o'clock Dentist.
Yeah.
And then 4 o'clock Marvin Gaye.
Yeah.
And you look at these things and you think, some of it you remember, some of it you can't. I had a sort of a record. And then the other thing, especially when I started doing these big international tours with the Stones and then Bowie, I'd be quite lonely. I'd be very lonely, actually. A lot of the people were older than me. A lot of the crew were American, especially on the Stones, and you'd be on your own. And so I would just writing stuff down, just really because that's what I always did. I've always, written stuff. So I'd have piles of things, but they're on the back of train tickets or airplane tickets or hotel things. So actually I've got boxes of material, like sort of archaeological remains that I haven't ever really gone through, and half of it I can't read anymore.
That's great. And what makes you, you can say without modesty now, because it's all in the book, what made you such a great PR guy for rock and roll stars?
Well, I think part of it is it's in your DNA, and I learnt to communicate very young. Now, sometimes I kind of sort of say, well, maybe that's because I had all this adoption thing and I had to learn to communicate, but I don't know. Either way, when I was a kid, I remember it would drive my parents mad that if we walked down the road, I would talk to everyone in the road, and the bloke digging the road, the bus conductor. I had conversations. This is when I'm 5 years old.
Yeah.
Then I was crazy about football, so I knew everything. So I talked to everyone about football, and then by about 11 or 12 or whatever, I'm listening to Radio Luxembourg, and I'm talking about, whatever it is, Motown or stuff. And I had this thing of I had to share it with everybody. So I had this natural thing about that. Secondly, I was really into newspapers, and that was football related because I used to play in a team. I used to have to these journeys again on my own, and I'd buy newspapers, and I started figuring out, the Daily Express write about football in one way, and then the Times in those days it would be Mr. Matthews kicked the ball, and then you'd read the Mirror, which would be, there was a melee and someone kicked it and up the Spurs or whatever it was. So I started to really understand the different styles, and then I started to learn the names of the journalists, and then of course as it segued into music, and then I discovered things like the NME and stuff, and Melody Maker and Chris Welch, and started, even at school I was writing letters to people like Chris Welch saying, can you give me a job?
Yeah.
To which he never responded.
Alan, that the spark that lit the fuse was punk. I mean, in the sense that was what made you think I can do this myself. And before you know it, you're representing the Stranglers. Yeah,
although yes and no, because when I started working for Keith Altham, and he chucked me in the deep end with the Who.
Yeah.
So who's Keith?
Just Keith was like the legendary PR. He represented everyone at Woodstock. He was the guy that told Jimi Hendrix to set fire to his guitar at Monterey Pop. Right. He represented. I mean, in his office, people like Eric Burdon and Keith Moon would pop in for a cup of tea every day. Yeah. Keith was the doyen of that, and so he gave me this job. I started working with the Who. 3 days into the job, he sent me out on the road with the Who. It's all completely mad. But I found that I'd arrived. And, we all have that moment in life, don't we? And you think, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Yeah. This is I enjoy it. This is natural to me. Yeah. So I learned all the mechanics, if you like. And Keith took me down the old Fleet Street, and there were people who hold the front page with visors and rolls of newsprint at Bouverie Street. You've seen it all, and people drinking scotch at 11 in the morning. And I thought, I love this. This is natural to me. So I'd learned, I will get around to the answer, because I'd learned the sort of how it worked really, and I felt comfortable with a lot of journalists. So when punk came along, this is where, you're right, Matt, this is where it explodes really and takes off. But I had that grounding, which meant that I had enough experience to be, if you like, the bridge between, in a way, between Fleet Street and punk and whatever. So I could connect both worlds. So certainly, and then I went mad with things like the Stranglers and stuff, and every day we were on a front page and there'd been a riot or a punch up. So yes, punk was where it all took off for me, and I became at the crossroads of everything, but probably without the groundwork from Keith, maybe that wouldn't have happened.
Tell us how you were hired by the Stones. I thought it was one of the best two-part stories
it's
in
an incredible
the book.
Story, really, isn't it? And it does sort of tell you so much about the Stones. Them. Yeah, about Mick and Keith and how it all works. It tells you everything, actually. So I get a call from Harvey Goldsmith. Hello, Alan, it's Harvey here. Do you want to work on the Stones? So of course, yes, and a lovely, wonderful. And Harvey sort of took me under his wing a little bit before then, and he'd been even to the point where he thought, I hadn't had Sunday lunch, so he and his wife Diane invited me around to Sunday lunch one day. Let's make sure I had a whole meal. But so I start working with the Stones, and I've flown out to New York to meet Mick, and he's staying in the Dakota building, I think it is. It's a massive room, bigger than most of the venues I'd been in at this stage. And I sit down there, and Mick comes out he's like the headmaster, and he fires this volley of questions at me. And they're really quite technical questions. It's like, what newspaper is in the Axel Springer group? What's the circulation of Liberacion? What's the reach of El Pi? Really hard stuff. Yeah. Now, because I by then travelled around Europe with all kinds of punk bands in the back of transits, I knew enough. And 45 minutes, he fired these questions at me, and then that was it. And I kind of went and got a plane back to London. And I sort of thought I was hired. And then one day, I'm sitting a couple of weeks later, I'm sitting in the office, Edgware Road, 9 o'clock at night, thereabouts. Phone rings, pick it up. It's Keith here. Listen here, sonny boy Jim. If you want to work for the Rolling Stones, you'll come and meet me tonight, now, midnight at Shepperton. I run this group, not that doddy-doddy-da Mick Jagger. I go, oh my God, I thought I'd been hired, and it's a bit sort of intimidating. But I knew where Mick was having dinner, some Italian restaurant, Cheney Walk. So I go down there, and I'm very much like a sort of Oliver Twist character coming in the back of the restaurant. Mick's there, I go up and I whisper in his ear behind, he's having dinner with a lot of very important people, Mick. I just had a call from Keith. He said, if I don't meet him at Shepperton at midnight, I haven't got the job. And Mick just looked down at me imperiously. He said, well, you better go then, better you? And I thought, what do I do? So I didn't. There was no Addison Lee account, and I didn't have a car. So I got a bus to Ealing Broadway, and then somehow got up there. So I get to Shepperton, and I'm shown into a room, small, quite a degree smaller than the studio we're sitting in. Yeah. There's a sort of cracked sink, a broken window, and nothing else, not even a chair. And Joe Seabrook, who's a lovely, gentle Joe, who was Keith's guy, said, just sit there or stay there. Sit there. I couldn't sit there, stay there. So I stood there. An hour goes by, and I could sort of in the distance, I can hear things like Satisfaction or Jumping Jack Flash wafting under the sort of in the air type of thing. Anyway, another hour. And when you're there, you just think, well, might as well stay. So then I see chinks of sunlight coming into the door, and I realise I've stood the whole night. I've actually stood there like I'm in detention. It was like school, and I'm thinking this is really weird. Have they forgotten? Does anyone know I'm here? And then the door literally comes almost off its hinges. In explodes Keith, and he does look like a pirate figure. It's like Johnny Depp. There's jewellery and things and hair and and he's like straight into it. He said, right, where's Johnny Cash's third album made? Who played bass with Gregory Isaacs? What was Jimmy Cliff's, all musical questions. Yeah. And they were nearly all blues, and a lot of them were reggae.
Right.
Which happened to be a sweet spot for me because I love reggae and I really did know it.
Right.
And then after about 15 minutes he just sort of grunted and walked out.
Amazing.
And then I get a call about a week later from Prince Rupert Lowenstein, who's the Stones sort of advisor or whatever those days. Lovely chap. Calls me over to his office in St James, oak panelled sort of room. He's got a pinstripe, the whole bit. Come in, Alan. He said, would you like a drink? Would you glass of sherry? I said, yeah, I'll have a pint. And he sort of,
a venti sherry.
Yeah, because I'm living on record company for a drink, so I'll have two, please. And it's very nice. He said something like, these Rolling Stones chaps seem to think you could be quite good at doing their public relations. Would you like a job? Yeah. Oh, yes, please. Please. Of course. I didn't question it, and I signed up there and then. I mean, I didn't really look at the amount of money. I just sort of it's the Rolling Stones.
Absolutely.
And that's how I got the job. But it did tell you everything about them, really.
And I guess once you've got the Rolling Stones and you're doing a good job for them, everybody else comes easy or not?
Yeah, the hard thing was, I did have other clients at that time, quite an eclectic mix. I can't quite remember, but it would have been maybe a bit pre-Big Country, although they were just on the horizon. Probably Motorhead, actually, maybe Aswad, right? A strange mix. Yeah. So I would be trying to keep that going when I was on the tour, and I was stretched beyond, it was almost unmanageable.
So is it just you at this point?
Well, I've got an office with people in it who are great, and I had a partner then, a chap called Ian Grant, who was great, and Ian was doing the management stuff, so that was what became Big Country, the Cult. At that point, we might have even been still co-managing the Stranglers. Yeah. But in terms of PR, I was out there on the road with no Filofax, no mobile phone, no nothing, just me and, my wits really, and doing 500 jobs, not going to sleep.
And a family as well, though.
And a young family, you know. I always remember Mick. Mick was I had two adopted daughters, Brian and Lola, and then Josie. And my next daughter, Ruby, came along, and I was out with the Stones, you know, and we couldn't think of a name. So I asked Mick, and he said, it's Tuesday, isn't it? I said, yeah.
Tuesday.
He said, call her Ruby.
Brilliant.
And I thought, yeah.
Well,
and she's
named
called
by
Ruby.
Mick Jagger.
Mick
as well.
Jagger
And
is
of course-
quite a
but-
cool thing
story.
to.
Yeah, but of course to her, who grows up being a Spice Girls fan in that, it's like,
Yeah.
who are the Rolling Stones?
Yeah.
The story only resonates now.
But it was obvious that working for the Stones was like working for what is working for a corporation, and then if there's a professional soulmate in the book, it is Bowie. I think is that fair?
Yeah.
And so tell us about how you got involved in working for him in the early '80s, because it's great.
Yeah, I
story.
mean, Bowie's omnipresent and he hovers, he's the thread through everything,
Yeah.
really. And we all have people we meet in our careers or lives or whatever, and some people you just sort of, you just click with, and there's no real explanation, So I had been managing a girl called Hazel O'Connor, who'd had a big success with Breaking Glass, number one movie, all of that. And Dave, I didn't know this. We had an office in 147 Oxford Street. It was like punk central, all kinds of stuff. And the guy, the manager in the film is based on me. Phil Daniels plays me. He sat in my office and researched that part. So Hazel's in there. She was our receptionist, and she'd brought in this cassette of, these songs she'd done. And I didn't know she was previously a hairdresser. She used to be nipping out at lunchtime sometimes down to Good Earth Studio to give David Bowie a haircut.
Right.
I mean, it's unreal how it all connects. So then David comes down to the music machine to see a Hazel gig. So that's when I first, and I'm the young sort of cocky manager, that's when I first encounter him. And then over the coming sort of years, I keep hearing, oh, Bowie's checking you out. Bowie's looking at you. I'm going, really? I just can't see anyone around.
And what sort of stage of his career is this then? This is...
Well, it would have been, so it's pre-Let's Dance.
Yeah.
So he'd done Low.
Yeah.
Which was, although one of the great albums, it was commercially, I think it only
Yeah,
sold
no,
100,000
yeah,
copies.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
nothing.
Well, the B-side is still abstract to this day,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, really,
But a really great record.
Yeah.
So anyway, then I get a call to meet him one day at Royal Garden Hotel. No, sorry, not the Royal Garden. It'll come to me in Knightsbridge, the Colton Towers in Knightsbridge. I go there and we have a chat, and it's all nice. And then I get flown out to New York. Very different to Mick. I go to David's office on Fifth Avenue, and the interview goes over 2 days. I mean, really lengthy, but not like an interrogation, more like a chat, and just talking about music and talking about stuff, talking about writers, and particularly journalists. Because David was really interested in writers and writing, and he wanted to know about all the young guns coming up. He wanted to know about Tony Parsons and Dylan Jones and people, and what were these guys like, and did you know anyone? Did I know anyone at the NME? Didn't really care about the national stuff. It was, and this magazine, The Face or Arena, and so that was this kind of, that was it. Then I went back to London. There was a press conference that I then started to look after, a press conference at Claridge's. Which at those days, I mean, that's one of the fantastic old school hotels. Churchill stayed there in the war. It's got all this history. David comes in. He's like a movie star because he's just done Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. He's got a fabulous tan. He's got a suit. He's just made this new record called Let's Dance.
Yeah.
He's signed with EMI. And he looks like you'd imagine, I don't know, it's Richard Burton. It's some people. I mean, he is like Cary Grant.
Yeah, exactly.
Cary Grant, that's what it is. Just class.
Yeah.
And we're in this hotel where there's people just pouring champagne and smoked salmon. All the journalists in those days put all their cassette players on the desk in front of him. David walks in and he's just so stylish, so great. And he also knows when to leave. And then he's gone like a big star. Then really my next memory is I'm on the plane to Australia for Serious Moonlight tour. I mean, there's been lots of little meetings in between. And it's one of those tours, it's just, you only get them a few times in your career. That maybe in Spice Girls for me, but where every day is good news. It's like every day you have to go and say, well, we've sold more tickets. The stadium's even bigger. The album's gone higher. Everything was incredible on that tour.
I can't think of another tour.
Lovely.
I mean, you must be able to. Maybe, I don't know, have you two ever done it? I mean, it seemed everybody knew about it. Everyone was talking about it. And it had such a... It seemed to transcend... It wasn't a pop concert. There was more to it. Bowie seemed to tap into the culture of the day, in a way that was extraordinary.
It was sort of not just welcome to a new phase in my career, but welcome to the 80s.
Yeah,
it felt like,
It was. You get very few people ever achieve a moment like that. I mean, I think you could say Michael Jackson probably did with Thriller. That crossed everything.
Yeah.
Maybe Taylor Swift now, in a way. I don't know. It's harder for me to judge that. But for David, it was, you're right, it was the future.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the 80s, really, was it?
It was what was
coming.
everything.
It was the next 50 years or something.
And, amazing. Do you miss him?
Well, I often kind of hear his voice in my head, if you know what I mean. And I sort of think, and at difficult times, I don't mean emotionally, but I mean difficult questions, I often think, what would David do? On behalf. So I might be, even with, say, something like the Spice Girls, in my head, I'd be thinking, oh, would David have done this or would he have done that? So he's the guru, really, that will always be there. But I have to say, he wasn't my mate. We didn't go down and hang out in the pub on Saturday afternoons. He wasn't like that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you how that worked. One day he rang me up. He said, because we had lots of phone calls in those days because it wasn't email, which was, he rang me. He said, Alan, I've just worked out something. He said, I've realised why I can never get you between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon for the last 20 years. He said, you're a football fan, aren't you? It's taken him 20 years to figure it out. So, but our relationship, we did have times where we talked a lot, and a lot of it was usually based on books.
Right.
And he was like a teacher to me, because I hadn't been to university or anything like that. And he'd be saying, have you read World Lit by Fire by, William Magister about the Renaissance? I go, no.
Yeah.
But I tried it and it was fantastic. And then he really turned me on to Peter Ackroyd, who became one of my all-time favourites, and I've read every
Is that right? I didn't know he was into him. Yeah, amazing.
Really into it, And then I remember there was a guy called Jake Arnott that he really liked, who did a great book, 2 great books, Long Firm, yeah. And so David said, can you find Jake and can we meet him?
Yeah.
Just the two of us go and meet Jake. So David was doing Hammersmith Apollo. Afterwards, I'd found Jake and we were in a room, somewhere nearby, and we go there. And David's like, really, forget the concert. He wants to talk to Jake. It's really exciting. He said, Jake, this book is great. He said, can you tell me, because the book's all about cops and robbers and bent coppers and robbers and gangsters in Soho and sawn-off shotguns. And he said, Jake, do you come from a family of heavies? Is the whole, what's the background in your family? Have you been in the wrong side of the law? And Jake said, oh, no. I went down to Hendon Library and researched it all. And David was a bit sort of nonplussed, but we had this lovely relationship, and then I would be able to recommend books to him, and so we became pen pals. And
though
books.
you make the very specific point that, with the exception of because of his wife's origins, taking an interest in the politics of Somalia, he was not. He was very chary about being used by politicians for a photo shoot, but he did get on with Blair, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, Bowie and Blair is a great story. So, and a very unexpected one, because David was one of my instructions, you always get different steers from your clients, but with David, it was always, I don't want to meet politicians. I don't care about it. I don't want to meet. But I really did. What he really didn't want was to be manipulated, to be used by them. And I accidentally started this process a bit with Alistair Campbell. And Alistair, I can't remember, I'd known Alistair and we were talking, and Alistair was saying, do you think Bowie'd come out for Blair? Because, Bowie was kind of liberal sort of guy. And I said, well, I don't know, he's not that interested in politics. Anyway, somehow or another, we cooked up this story, and I thought it would just be a little bit in the sun. So I get the paper, and it's a full-page thread, Bowie backs Blair. And I'm going, oh, my God, I'm in trouble.
Yeah. So
I had to show it to David. He was like, oh, it's just papers. It didn't faze him at all. And from there on, things started to develop. And I remember David said to me, he said, why should I back Blair as a matter of interest? What is it you see in Tony Blair? I said, well, I think he's going to be Prime Minister for the next 10 years. David looked at me, and it was pretty pressing, I have to say.
Yeah.
I was obviously
exactly right.
I was in touch with the other world then, because it was 10 years. So Tony came along to a Bowie show at Wembley Arena, and David was doing quite a lot of new material. It wasn't always an easy show. It was a long 2.5 hours or something. Tony turned up an hour early, and so it's just me and him in a room like this, because there was no one else around. And it was really, really, really good fun. And he was sort of, we had a bottle of wine, just the two of us. It was really good. And he wasn't Prime Minister then. He was still Labour leader. And he was saying, what's it like on the road? He said, I remember ugly rumours, but what's it like with UB40?
A bit different. Yeah.
And I was thinking, I told him some of UB40, but I thought, I've just come back off of UB42. I can't really tell you, because it might be a bit too much. You don't look like, it might be shocking.
You do not want to gaze at the sun.
Yeah. Anyway, so he came along. David came and did the show. And what I noticed about Blair was he stayed for the whole show.
Yeah.
Very unusual.
Very telling.
Lights came up the end and he's still sitting there.
Yeah.
And he's totally into it. He comes back and he talks to David. He then, by the time he left, there's no one else in Wembley Arena except the guys in the high-vis jackets. And Tony he amazingly knew them all by name somehow.
No way.
These are the security blokes.
Yeah.
I thought this guy,
he's got it. Yeah.
He's got it. I'm voting for him for sure.
Yeah.
And then they developed a bit more of a rapport. And then there was another Alistair and I moment. And this was the Brits. There was an idea. I can't remember who cooked it up. I mean, Alistair can claim credit. I can claim credit. Who knows? But
Alistair will claim credit. Yeah.
But one thing is, one thing is, I don't think it was Bowie or Blair. It was the PRs cooked it up, and we decided that Tony should present this award to David. David was a bit, and it just anyway. So we get to Earl's Court. It's a big cavernous place, and there's and we've got to write a speech, and it's agreed that I can write one sentence, Alistair writes the next, and it goes, and we literally write it on the back of a cigarette packet.
Yes.
There's nothing there.
Very Bowie-esque approach to writing.
Very much.
This really was the first podcast, wasn't it? Actually, it was a podcast without recording.
So there's all these people milling around backstage, being sort of rock stars or whatever. So Alistair and I have to find somewhere quiet. The only place we can find is a phone box. So we squeeze into a phone box and write this speech. And then, then it comes to the event. Tony gets up on stage and there's a mixed reaction because at that point the record industry was still a lot of fat cats in pinstripe suits with cigars, and it's like, we're worried about the tax or something, And I think, well, Tony Blair's great, and I'm realising not everybody thinks exactly the same as I do about it,
Yeah.
And he's up there waiting, and then David comes up, and David is he's doing Hello Spaceboy. David comes up and he's wearing stilettos, and Blair was definitely like, it was definitely an awkward moment. Yeah. And Tony said, Alistair said afterwards, he said a couple of weeks ago, he said to me, that was one of the few times he'd seen Tony completely lost for words.
You're probably thinking, you didn't look this tall last time.
Didn't look this tall. But they, bit by bit, they developed a really nice rapport. And then David went, Tony, I used to get letters occasionally at the office, and on the back it'd say 10 Downing Street. What? And they'd be like, what's happening with the album or stuff like
amazing,
that. And then he invited him down. By then, David had become, they'd really developed a relationship. And I remember Tony invited him down to Chequers. By then, David was married to Imam. And I remember because I was involved in all the arrangements, and Bill Churchman, the driver, and the car had to drive there, and you couldn't have a phone and all the sort of stuff that goes with it. And David said, well, I can't really stay over because I've got to go and meet Goldie the next day because we're working on Everybody Loves Sunshine, this new film. So they went and had a lovely lunch and everything. And I remember Blair talked about it afterwards, and he said something like, I think he said David was so good looking, it seemed as if he'd been chiseled out or made by God. Or something. It was a great quote. But it was unexpected, but a lovely... lovely rapport.
We can move on from David in a minute, but I know we're all obsessed with him. But was he a happy man, David Bowie?
He's an artist, so he's very in the flesh. If he was sitting here now, very self-effacing, very modest. He'd come up to the office and make coffee for people. I mean, really, really lovely guy. But when it came to art, music, painting, whatever it was, I mean, it was completely obsessive, forensic, So, he was very happy in Australia when everything went incredible. But there were other times, say we were doing Tin Machine and we were on the road, I mean, that was really tough. But he was the kind of guy that he had an absolute belief. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't worried about what everyone else said. This is going to work. This is the right thing. I believe in it. Mm. And he would really... And if in the end, when it didn't work or he wanted to move on, he wasn't a blame merchant. He'd just say, okay, well, it's gone to another thing. But so in answer to your question, he wasn't sort of happy in the obvious sense. I mean, he didn't sort of just...
In his private life he was, though, wasn't he? He found a happiness there.
He was he was a very nice guy. He was a very funny guy.
Yeah.
Loved humour. Read a lot. But he was... I just think... Are any artists happy?
I'm
not sure.
I had a conversation with. We went just after he died. I went out for dinner with Tony Parsons, who's a mutual friend.
Of course.
And Tony was, I think, quite sort of taken aback by. Obviously, 69's not not old, but it's not, nor is it, weirdly young either. And he said, I bet he just thought, God, just give me 10 more years, with my family, and I wondered whether, knowing about how his life had panned out, and a roller coaster, drug abuse and success and failing success. And I just wondered whether he had got that stage of contentment, really, towards the end of his time.
I think Tony's right. He was always looking forward. Yeah. He was always like, I've got this next project, I've got this new idea. And he said to Tony Visconti, literally must have been a few weeks before he passed away, I'm going to kick this thing.
Yeah.
He didn't. Yeah. And at the end, it all came very quick.
Right.
I think he thought,
carry on.
Yeah.
He wasn't reflective in a way. He wasn't someone who's looking back and saying, oh, the good old days, or this could have been that. He was always like,
what's next?
One of the things that goes through the book, Alan, is you talk quite often about the quest for a surrogate family.
Yeah.
And how your clients are your surrogate family. Yeah. And I think a lot of people in their work, actually, especially creatives, people involved in the creative work, writing, whatever, they find a surrogate family at work. But how did that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I'm sure we all do, don't we? But for me, it wasn't just an office. It was sort of my tribe,
Yeah.
And when people used to leave, which they invariably did, I mean, I'd be heartbroken.
Yeah.
I'd take it so personally. I look back and I think, it was just, I should have been a bit more chilled. And when punk came along, I kind of suddenly belonged. And I knew a lot of the musicians in punk from before punk. I'd known Billy Idol and I'd known Brian James from The Damned, and suddenly we were all together. And I remember when Paul Cook wore that I Hate Hippies t-shirt and stuff, and I thought, I don't like hippies either, and we'd all thrown away our Eagles albums or whatever, and that was just for those years. And then I'd be travelling everywhere with the Stranglers or the Buzzcocks or whatever, and it felt like we were all in the same thing and a change in the world or whatever, And I, funny enough, had that again with the Spice Girls, and I couldn't really ever fully understand that because I had my own lovely family. But when we'd be around at, Victoria's parents, and Jackie and Tony there would be cooking or doing stuff, and we'd get a takeaway. And then always when you were out with them, there'd be mums, dads, uncles, aunts, and I loved it. And I felt really part of this big, probably 50 or 60 people around the girls who were family. And I felt part of it, and I felt very, very
appreciated and loved. Yeah,
something, yeah. Thanks. Quick swig of water here. And I've looked back on it really, and it's quite kind of hard to explain. And I can only think it's all stuff to do with, my early childhood or whatever. But it only lasts for 2 or 3 years, because then all the cracks appear and different people go off and do solo records or whatever. But it's a wonderful feeling where you're all part of a movement, family, whatever.
Well, just give us the brief context of the early childhood, because a lot of people won't know what you're alluding to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've over-egged this or underplayed it, actually. I mean, I was adopted, so not completely unusual by any means. So my brother Tony and sister Mary, and I had I'm adopted for lovely people. But years later, I mean, I checked it out a bit, and it had been a pretty tough first year or so, dumped around all kinds of various places.
What age would you have been?
About 1.5.
Oh, right. So as a baby.
Yeah. But I mean, it was really rough. I'd been like 6 weeks here, 3 days taken away by, all that kind of stuff around South London. My mother had come over very poor from Ireland. She was living in the, she was probably on the wrong side of the tracks a bit, living in, working in Soho. It was, right. Like that kind of a background. So, and years, when I got adopted, apparently I cried for about the first year, never cried again. I don't remember all that, but I had a very happy childhood. And but when I went back, I went to check it out later on, probably in the early 90s or something, and they gave me, in those days, you went into the Adoption Society. It was a Catholic Adoption Society in Tarsill or something, and they just give you all the paperwork. And suddenly I'm reading letters from my mother, and they're really quite unsettling, because there's sort of things like, well, they're it's like talking about pass the parcel. It's weird. So I put all that away really, and sort of accidentally lost it, misfiled it, and never thought about it again. And then when Brexit came along, an interesting subject, I know, and I thought, well, I'm going to get one good thing out of it. I'm going to get I'll get an Irish passport.
Yeah.
You know, because I know my mother's Irish, so that shouldn't be hard. So I wrote into the, I can't remember, I checked it out. I mean, my secretary at the time, PA, Sarah Bedford, came into me and said, you know you've got a half-sister, don't you? And I said, no idea. I never knew I had at all. And so we made the connection. By the way, the passport just turned up like that because it wasn't really a debate because I had an Irish mother, so it was simple enough. And then my half-sister called me up and she said, you better sit down. Do you want to, I'll tell you, maybe you should have a drink Saturday morning. And she told me this, about my mother and that, And anyway, I sort of, she was very, very nice, very kind. And she gave me an address for my mother. So I wrote her a letter. And to me, this was a really precious, sort of strange, I rewrote the letter 50 times and took a photocopy of it. And, I got a letter back from my mother. And it was very largely very sort of the weather's nice today type of thing, and you're looking for something profound and deep, And we had a bit more dialogue. She didn't really want to meet up, which was, not very nice. She felt a bit sort of rejected again, I suppose. And then COVID came along. She got ill, not with COVID, but then she went to the hospital. Basically, like a lot of people, never left the hospital.
Right.
Died. Didn't even have a funeral because of the COVID thing.
So you never got.
So
to
I
meet
never
her?
got to meet her. And
Seriously?
yet she was living 4 stops in the tube from me all that time.
You're kidding.
So,
And of course, she'd been working in Soho in the West End. She'd gone, and I knew that because she did tell me places like the Marquee and whatever the Astoria.
You may have walked past
I've
it,
always
something
thought
you probably were
statistically the chances are very high that I've walked past her or stood next to it at the bar
many
in
times.
a club or whatever. So
tell us about the Spice Girls.
Change
Because
of gear.
I mean, change of gear, but also yet again, you find yourself right at the heart of the cultural moment. I mean, I don't think it's people now fully realise because they are national treasures, etc. But when they first started, and I remember reading a quote from Johnny Rotten saying that their first album was the most important since Nevermind the Bollocks, because it had completely.
Did he say that? That's
it
great.
had completely captured the sort of music hall goes global.
Oh, funny.
Characteristic of British pop at its most dangerous and obviously they were pop, not punk. But it was they weren't just perfect pop, were they? They were something very special. Tell us what they were like.
I mean, Lydon is so perceptive because he was really right. Because I'd never heard that quote. It's a really fascinating one because when I got involved with, Spice Girls, and it all happened very suddenly, and we can go back in the story if you like, but I loved it. To me, it was punk rock. I thought, to me, they were the Sex Pistols. It was irreverent. It was tabloid. It was wild. They made it up as they went along. They were all characters. They were all funny, and it was also a bit anti-establishment. And there was this sort of, there was a kind of whiff of republicanism in the air at the time, and it was very much a sort of. And it was like OK Magazine, and it wasn't Hello, and it wasn't royalty on bikes in Liechtenstein or something like that. And it was kind of very working class, if you want to call it. And all the girls had grown up in normal homes, reading The Sun and The Mirror and the whatever. And they were determined to push it all as far as it could. Every day, my first 2 or 3 days with them, flew out to Rome. They did a show and a concert for fans. They then decided they want to go shopping in Paris, private plane there. They then went to Madrid to do some media thing. We then went to a disco. This was just like every day it was fantastic, and it reminded me it was like a modern version very much of the Pistols. It was because the Pistols were British cartoon tabloid. And it's great that Lydon made that thing. By the way, I can connect them up with Bowie as well, because one day I called from Victoria. She said, Alan, I've been reading all this press about David Bowie. It's great because it means we know we're in really safe hands. And I thought, wow. Cool. So the Spice Girls,
that was
Posh and Becks,
Yeah.
It connects with David. But
where did the phrase "girl power" come from?
I think came from Jerry, or maybe a friend of Jerry's that worked at The Guardian. But
Right.
Jerry was very serious about girl power as an actual movement.
Yes.
And she was, political's not the right word, but she was really, really strong about it. And that did, they were all very bright, but that did really drive a lot of stuff. You know?
Totally.
We'd have a lot of conversations on it. And I mean, of course, I look back at the irony, I I should have been a girl, but I wasn't. I just arrived at that place in time. But as Matt says, they were so big. It was like, I mean, I miss Beatlemania, but must have been like that.
Yeah.
And people screaming in the streets.
Yeah,
and
but it did
mobs
have that social movement, didn't it? Where suddenly, it spread out horizontally very quickly and touched loads and loads of different parts of culture.
Yeah, I mean, my daughters and stuff, the sort of Mel B, Mel B, a mixed race girl, you coming out like that in a leotard, owning the concept of black and this, that, the other, was very empowering for them, and they're growing up in North London and listening to Jazzy B and Salt and Pepper, whatever, but Scary Spice was important to them.
Yeah,
and they've all had very interesting after stories. I mean, it's fun. The reason I mention it is I've just come from the Hay Festival.
Yeah,
and I was in the bookshop one day, and there was a humongous queue. And you know where this is going.
What, Dylan's book?
It was Jerry, and it was all kids' book, and there were, and every line in the queue was a mum or a dad with a young girl. And I thought, fair play.
Yeah.
Because there'll be lots of people that would mock that, that would say, but hey, still at the heart of it all, after a very, very long time.
Yeah, I mean, what interesting careers. So, I mean, and Jerry obviously in the world of Formula One and the rest of it. By the way, she wrote me a really nice little note about the book last week, which was really sweet of her. I mean, Mel, I really fond of, but I mean, what a life she's lived, and then the book about the sort of the whole, violence against women and stuff like that, and she's been through. She
did a great TV series with Ruby Wax? Was it when they went to the States? Was it her and Emma? There was the three of them in the States going, and she always came across as so natural, but when you got a camera following her for that period of time, the mask can slip, but it didn't in her case. No, she seems like an absolute diamond.
No, she was really natural, and she, you look at her life, and she's really, she really lives life to the full.
Yeah.
And then Victoria, I mean, what can you say about Victoria? She, a global brand,
totally,
an entrepreneur.
And you point out in the book that she's very funny.
Funny, I ended up managing Victoria, so I was very close to her for a couple of years, and we got on like a house on fire because she was so. I straight away called her Witty Spice. She was so funny, so good on the one-liners, so smart, so across everything. A fantastic business brain, really.
Yeah.
She, real pleasure, really good fun working with her. And you know what? When it came to an end, as these things often do, they wanted American management, global, and this, that, the other. But actually, Victoria turned up my office one morning, early in the morning, like about 9 o'clock, and sat down on the sofa with me and talked to me for a couple of hours about it. And you go, that's really rare.
Yeah.
Normally you get some Weasley sort of message from a lawyer.
They just cut the cord and they're off.
Yeah, and she was great. We used to have meetings. I always remember in the cafe at Heels on Tottenham Court Road. And no one clocked her because it couldn't be Posh Spice with a load of people having afternoon tea. And of course,
this couldn't be.
But it was.
It was.
Have
you ever had clients, Alan, that you thought you look back on and you think, I wish I'd never met them?
Well, maybe some clients think that about me. Do you know, I've been asked this quite a lot in the last couple of weeks. Who do I hate? Who do I do? And I've really struggled with it.
Right.
Because I suppose the ones that you really... I think if you're going to do this job, and go back to your early question of being made, I love music, and I love, and I feel I have an empathy for musicians. And I realise that if someone can write something, stand on a stage in front of 100,000 people and perform it, they're a magician. They've got something that us mere mortals haven't got. So I have a respect, because how can they be the same? They're going to have issues, and they're going to have paranoias, and they're going to have stresses, and they're going to all the thing of performing. So I think I've always made allowances for what you might call bad behaviour. Even being fired. Sometimes being fired, it can be funny. Flatley one is always the greatest. When I got fired for about second time, and actually I had a call recently asking if I wanted weather. I thought, the second time was great. We were around at Universal. It's a big boardroom meeting. There's all the sort of marketing people, and they go around. You have to go around the room. 30 people introducing. It gets to me. I said, "Oh, Alan, it was the PR." And he says, "Haven't I fired you?" And I said, "Yeah, you actually have. Yeah. I thought you knew." He said, "Well, you're fired again. Get out." And I had to go out and leave. But it was so funny. And also I had been paid in advance.
Yeah, fine. Okay.
I had no bad feeling about it at all. The only ones that really I could be annoyed about are the ones that do that Weasley stuff that I just said, where, they decide it's that thing of the album's not been a hit. It must be the PR's fault. Yeah. So you get fired for no reason, right. And then they don't they know it's not right, so they don't call you.
Right.
And you get the lawyer saying, "Well, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad tidings, but they decided they want to move on." Go, "Oh yeah, great." And then they come back probably.
Just a flip, just a brief flip on that question. Then, is there an album or a show that you felt like it didn't get the plaudits it deserved? That it's kind of lingering out there in the land of mediocrity, but actually it was better than you could sell it.
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, there's lots. I was a big Velvet Underground fan, so I have every Lou Reed record, every John Cale record. To me,
Songs for Driller.
Yeah, they're all brilliant,
amazing, yeah.
Brilliant records. Or Paris 1919. What a piece of work! Yeah. But I don't hear that on
no,
Absolute Radio very often. So yeah, and of course there's some that go completely wrong. I remember a Robert Palmer show at the Albert Hall, and he was doing music. He was doing a sort of big band type thing, but the posters hadn't really expressed this properly, and everyone thought they were going to get
addicted to love.
Addicted to love with loads of people dancing. So we're in the Albert Hall, and it's really like, the atmosphere's going worse and worse, and you can hear a pin drop between the songs. And then you can hear there's a guy next to me reading what looks like Dostoevsky, there's people asleep. It's really, really bad. There's so many people leading out, leaving, that they shut the doors, they lock the doors, so you can't leave the Albert Hall.
Sounds like an Arsenal game at 85 minutes.
Very, very good, very funny. And Robert Palmer said something like, great to be here. Has anyone got any questions? And some wag stands up in the same row as I and says, "Yes, when's Robert Palmer coming on?" I mean,
oh dear.
And he was, by the way, Robert Palmer was a lovely man and very, very talented. Sneaking Sally through the alley, great.
Can I ask a final question about music, Alan?
Yeah.
Which is, reading the book, you've really you've been there at a golden age of music, and when music changed stuff. You talk about Prince in the book. You talk about, these are big figures that we'll be talking about in 100 years' time.
Yeah.
Now, something we bat about a bit is music's massive. People go and see music. The role of music is not in question, but can music still change the world in the way that... So, you talk about having a kickabout with Bob Marley.
Yeah.
Now, when you say you have a kickabout with Bob Marley, you're not just talking about having a kickabout with the guy who sang a Redemption song. You're talking about having a kickabout with a person that was culturally consequential, and we all still think about in those terms. Now, I suppose what I'm driving at is, are there going to be... Do you think there are going to be music is going to produce figures like Bowie, Bob Marley, John Lennon, and so on, or has it migrated, that energy migrated somewhere else?
I suspect it's gone somewhere else. You talk about Bob Marley. He became, for the third world, he became a symbol of change, freedom, revolution, whatever. And you could go anywhere in Africa or anywhere in the world, and there'd be people wearing Bob Marley T-shirts. He had a spiritual significance. Bowie had a cultural significance, and these people did change the world. And one of the things about these kind of people was that they were totally authentic, and they were totally genuine. It was totally out there, and it wasn't a job. This is what they were put on earth.
What they were.
Bob Marley died very young. David died relatively young. It's what they were. Now you get a feeling that things are so protected and managed and controlled. You almost feel like, okay, well, they've done the album. Now they're off buying some new property or doing some investments in private equity, and then they'll make a record. And whereas people, Bowie never really I mean, I would put all kinds of offers to him, and he'd say, well, "Is it going to be interesting? What's the visual going to be like?" And then at the end, he might say, "Oh, what's the money?" You know. But it was a really different mindset. I kind of think maybe, you see, footballers are very, very powerful and influential people now, probably much more so. You know, I mean, if Bukayo Saka said, "Well, you should do this or you should do that," I'd probably be very influenced by it, which is crazy. They have that sort of kind of effect. So there's a feeling that canon of work, that those people, and it's very important to include Prince, and there's lots we're missing out.
Hip hop as well as a movement. You know.
You know, Run DMC. I mean, it's a. But that may be the canon forever. And in the way that if you're a classical music fan, you're probably still listening to Mozart or Handel or whatever. Yeah. I'm sure you're right there when you say in 100 years we'll be listening to Marley. In 1,000 years we will. Then the short answer to your question is there's no sign of it. Those people coming out from music, they may be entrepreneurs, they may be tech people, they may be,
But it's not Taylor Swift, is it? For instance, you know, to take the biggest name.
She's important, and people pay £700 for a ticket or whatever it is. But she doesn't say, "I'm an alligator."
No,
and there's a big difference.
There was a great interview with Neil Tennant, the Pet Shop Boys in the FT the other day with Janine Gibson, and Neil Tennant said, "Well, I understand Taylor Swift's enormous, but what's your favourite Taylor Swift song?"
Yeah,
and it's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know?
I think, you know, I think again, if you look at I mean, we'll keep picking on David, don't we? But my recollection of that time, there was nobody in the world of any age, any ethnicity, anything who wasn't interested or didn't like David Bowie. I wasn't in some way thinking about something David had said or done or worn. Taylor Swift seems to me brilliant. I mean, and I noticed, by the way, someone told me the other day that when she's doing interviews, she wants dossiers on them, and very much Jagger Bowie, to be honest.
Right.
So I have an enormous respect for her, and I've seen her play live. It's incredible. But does it cross all generations in that way?
Or does it frighten generations? Because the thing I find interesting is, and maybe it's just because I'm not going to the right gigs, right? But there are very few gigs I go to where I feel, oh, I really don't belong here. So the last gig, I thought, this is definitely for young people, not for me. And it was a great gig, was Tyler, the Creator. Fantastic gig, right? But I thought, I'm an old fart, I shouldn't be here, right? But most gigs, I feel very comfortable at. And lucky me. But that also tells me that the energy is gone, the rebellion. You know, if I'm 56 now, if I turned up at a Sex Pistols screen on the Green, looking like I do, right?
Still would have been. It could have been rough. Something.
I think things could have got a bit
Sid Vicious
previous.
Could have come and had a chat. And it might not have been great.
No, and I just can't. But I also think that it must exist somewhere. That's one point, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think it must, and it does. I mean, it's probably not politics. It'll be there. It'll be there.
Look, we could literally
talk all day.
We're only just starting.
Yeah,
we have lots we could talk about.
But the book
out on around to Motorhead.
June the 6th.
Depressed.
I was there. Dispatches from a Life in Rock and Roll. Absolutely dynamite read.
Must read.
Alan, thank you. And by the way, I did mention this before you came into the room, but you were ever so supportive of the New European when we launched, for which I am eternally grateful, and I'm only glad that we're still here to be able to celebrate that as well, despite Brexit. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Alan.
Wonderful. So,
and all the best with the book. It's great.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks.